product experience here at In Rhythm. I am super excited to be joined by my friends and colleagues, John Fullerton and Tre Cates. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to spend about an hour together. This will be sort of a podcast style live panel. I have some questions for John and Tre, and we'll hear from them and lots of their thoughts around this moment that we find ourselves in and all the ways that we can bring regenerative capacity and regenerative leadership to this moment. So at the end of this call, once we sort of wrap up some of our conversation, I'll share some additional ways that you can get engaged, get involved, work with us to build your capacity in this kind of approach, and really foster community around regenerative approaches to leadership and economics. So you'll want to stay to the end. We're also going to be sharing some information about our current giveaway. So you'll want to hang on for that. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. First of all, I'm super happy to be joined here by Tre Cates and John Fullerton. Tre Cates is the founder of In Rhythm, and In Rhythm is an organization that works to build regenerative capacity and leadership across the world. In Rhythm works in regenerative leadership and design, and we also operationalizes regenerative business practices. We do this with a global education platform. There are all kinds of courses and content that we offer, as well as directly consulting and working with and partnering with all kinds of organizations all over the world. John Fullerton is the thought leader behind regenerative economics and is the founder of Capital Institute. For over a decade, Capital Institute has been pioneering a new space for holistic economic thought. So John envisions a powerful regenerative economy that can unleash unseen possibility for prosperity. And so together, uh, John and Tre come to you to bring forward this vision for what does it look like to bring regenerative approaches not only into our larger meta-economic structures, but also into our organizations, into our communities, into the ways that we work together. So John and Tre, I will pass it to you to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and a little bit more about how your partnership came to be, just to give context for some of the folks on this call who may not have that background. And then I'll jump in with some questions for you.
Sure. You want me to kick off, Tre? Sure. So, hi, everyone. Great to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of unfamiliar faces. I'm John Fullerton, and in very brief, my story is 20 years on the old Wall Street, or the old world of Wall Street, and then 20 years trying to reimagine how capitalism might work and not destroy the planet and ruin people in the process. And that search has led me to this idea of regeneration, which is very simply stated, the process that explains how life actually works. So my thesis is we need to bring our economics, both theory and practice, back into alignment with how living systems work. It's as simple as that and as profound as that. And Tre Cates and I met, gosh, over a decade ago, in the context of our work with the Savory Institute. Alan Savory has been championing an idea of holistic planned grazing, which is essentially regenerative agriculture on large landscape scale. And Tre and I came away with our own versions of epiphanies. Mine to rethink at the systemic level how economies and finance in particular needed to work. And Tre came away thinking about how organizations needed to work. And with that, obviously, leadership. So that's my short version. But Tre, please embellish.
Thank you, John. And thank you all for being here. Super excited to dig into what real transformation looks like. And our story really is a story of transformation. I came out of a deep commitment to building organizations in the tech space and transforming what it looked like for us to bring community transformation, and then found some really incredible insight through Alan and some others in leadership around seeing things through this ecosystem lens. And John and I were both inspired and coming from that, the ability to rethink the whole system, and for me to recognize the power that exists in the individual and the collective. And so for us, it became a real emphasis upon what can we do to support conditions to release potential in individuals and teams. And that now has brought us into this what we call With Life platform, an educational community coming together and supporting people on their journey to reimagine themselves in their communities, be able to release potential that I think we are exist to experience in all these unique ways. So that is what we're most excited about, and we're excited to see over 100 plus people here today to have that conversation with us. And just a reminder, we have over 2,000 plus people in our community currently from 81 countries. So it's awesome to continue in these conversations.
And I might just pipe in real quick on that. So we decided to merge our communities into one organic living system community, in part because of the complete overlap in sort of worldview philosophy, but also, in a sense, walking the talk of collaboration rather than everyone building their own silo. So
Yeah.
we're hoping to add more partners and thought leaders to this network, but it's intentionally not called the Capital Institute platform or the In Rhythm platform, to be an open space for living systems-based learning and manifesting.
Thank you, Tre and John. So speaking of systems, you have both worked in some really complex systems, finance, nonprofits, global development, trade technology. So as you reflect on some of the experience that you're bringing to these conversations and to the work that we do, what have been some of your biggest personal learnings, or maybe I should say unlearnings, around what does it mean to become a regenerative leader? How is that different from some of the traditional models of leadership in these complex systems that you've experienced? Tre, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is in a living system, the things that we recognize that are very significant pattern is the opportunity for there to be room for development. Leadership isn't a top down, I'm going to tell you what to do and control it and direct it. It is more about creating conditions and nurturing the potential in the individual and the collective and the system. And so it's deeply development. And there just isn't room for a lot of that in a lot of organizations today or in their systems. We expect people to be exactly who they need to be from the beginning they start in an organization. And ultimately, we need to reimagine how we support people in that development. And that to me is at the heart of regenerative leadership.
It's interesting you say that, Tre. I'm reminded way back when I started my career on Wall Street, the first thing that I did is I got accepted into the Morgan training program. And this was it was essentially a mini MBA paid for by the bank, where we essentially worked in class together with our other trainees for 6 months and then 3 months in a credit training program. And throughout that whole time, we were building a cultural bond and learning the culture of the firm. And I contrast that with what, my kids and their peers are dealing with today, where, many people work remotely, that, you're hired as a task to fit a cog, a slot in the machine. And the lack of humanity with which we're treating young professionals is just striking to me. So I think one thing, just to create a big context, is that I think the business world used to be more regenerative than it is now, just naturally. And as the pressure for profits and short-term earnings and competitive pressures rise, a lot of the cultural behaviors that were just intuitively more aligned with what we would call regenerative have been peeled away. And it's, people now get fired by email and people get hired with never meeting a person. And so we've truly gone to treating humans as if they were just expendable parts. And this thing about regeneration that's at one level is actually very simple. It's that human beings are the capital of an enterprise, and we should invest in their development and leaders' own development, not for the sake of being nice people and good guys, but because that's where the true potential lies, is the magic of combining unique individuals with their unique skills and essence and passions into an organization. We used to say in Morgan that we look to hire athletes more than fill jobs. And what we meant by that is we wanted to hire great people who could grow into lots of things we would never, grow into jobs we didn't have designed for them yet. And that was the culture that I enjoyed and why I stayed there for 20 years. But that world has shifted, and now what I see my kids dealing with is it's horrific, to be honest. So this is a radical shift from current behavior, but it's not as radical from what business used to be like in the better days, I would say.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that the emphasis on productivity and efficiency within this industrialized system guarantees the experience and the outcomes that John just shared. We are only measuring things to drive us into producing more and do it as efficiently as possible. And in a living system, you nurture the potential in the system. You don't push for it. You don't pull it. You continue to create conditions for what to emerge to surprise us, to inspire us, to engage us, and that is very different behavior. If there isn't, that doesn't mean there isn't room for what and how do we produce something or make it efficient. It just can't be designed around people in that way. People, there is so much potential. I remember Alan Savory once said when he was thinking about the desertifying grasslands around the world, where people were discounting it as no more value, and he came up with the slogan of 5 billion hectares of hope, and I
Of hope?
actually of hope,
Yeah.
and I actually see that as a part of our ongoing commitment to humanity, instead of seeing it as something that weighs down all of us. What if all of those faces and all those unique individuals and all these incredible cultures could be seen as a solution to the things that we are so troubled by today? And that is reframing this. It is not something that weighs us down. It's something that can release an incredible amount of potential and uniqueness into the world.
Thank you. Um, you're kind of leading me into the next question that I had for you, which is really about what and starting to allude to some of these challenges, but let's talk a little bit about what are the current challenges in bringing transformation and bringing this approach to leadership into our current moment. So, what are some of these deeper patterns that we're seeing that are keeping us as a whole from really creating and seeing the kinds of tangible social, environmental, and economic transformations that we need to shape this regenerative future? Where are these patterns coming from? One of the things that you just mentioned, Trey, that I'll call out is this focus on productivity and efficiency as almost a myopic focus, just having all these unintended consequences and all these unintended impacts. What are some other patterns that you see that are challenging us in this moment?
Don, you want to start that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw out two to get us started. The two thoughts that popped into my head, Natalie. First one is fear. It is not an easy job to be a leader today. In fact, I think it's incredibly difficult to be a leader today, whether you're in a multinational corporation or a startup or a hospital or Harvard University. It's incredibly challenging, and that leads naturally to a falling down the consciousness spectrum into fear-based behavior. And the second thing I would say is that business, and I'm very critical of the business case for. I've written a bit about that, but we just let's talk about the whole blowback to ESG and DEI. In my opinion, of course, it's helpful if there is a business case to behave in certain ways. But when the issues are, something as profound as, life altering forever climate change, or the residual trauma of decades, centuries of racism, adding a few KPIs to a manager's, to-do list and grading them in their annual bonus appraisal based on those KPIs, using metrics that, can't possibly address the long-term complex challenges that are underlying these issues, was sort of bound to generate
I sent you the
unsatisfactory.
link last night, the notice.
Whoever's talking, could you please put yourself on mute? Thanks. It was bound to generate unsatisfactory results and reduce a lot of these issues to, mere checklists. And I think that's the root of that problem, is that we treat organizations, as Trey said, as if they're machines, and we apply our reductionist logic to managing organizations that we should apply to making machines, but not apply to managing human enterprises. And managing human enterprises requires an entirely different mindset, first and foremost, because they're living, whether it's a family or a company or a hospital, it's a living organism. And I think our leaders have been misled and poorly educated by our traditional mechanistic business school management by objective, results-oriented, blah, 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 is very confused. It's very confused thinking. And we're seeing the results of that all over the world, in terms of the disengaged employees and all kinds of other consequences.
I'll add one more pattern. Thank you, John. I'll add one more pattern that I think is, and it's very clear. It's a description of our current environment, and that is our siloing of information. We've done an enormous job trying to protect and silo things to actually encourage deep productivity and efficiency. But what it's done is created an enormous amount of extra work to be able to have these kinds of conversations. We have a real commitment to breaking down those silos, to be able to allow for shared information to be something that is at the basis of what we're talking about in terms of real transformation. There is something that has happened that is a result of commoditizing and systematizing in ways to reduce the uniqueness and to make homogeneity the primary design of our system. And that needs to change to be able to bring real diversity and real potential to play.
Yeah, and let me just give two quick examples of that, Trey, if I can. I'm so glad you brought up the information piece. So last fall, I was in Greece on a regenerative retreat that I don't know if Dimitris is on here or not, but two of our course alum organized, and it was on an island, Andros Island, and we were all going to take the ferry boat to get out there. And at the last minute, turns out the ferry's on strike. So we had our first little learning opportunity. And we end up sleeping on the ferry, and we met with the ferry captain and talked about the strike and why was there a strike and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out, one of us asked the question like, well, do the workers who are on strike understand the economics of the business? And the captain very angrily said, well, why would they need to know any of that information? Their job is to work, basically. And so you saw the consequence of this lack of information sharing, where the crew on the ship had no idea about the financial pressures that the operation was under. And the captain of the ship, the literal captain, was not only unwilling to share it, he was annoyed at the suggestion that the little people should have access to the information. Contrast that with literally, I think it might have been the exact same trip. No, it was a different trip. I went to visit the Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque Country in Spain last year. And this is a sprawling ecosystem of 80 businesses, all owned as co-ops by the employees. But that's not the important part for this conversation. The point is that they manage this entire ecosystem of businesses as a single whole. And one of the questions I asked the guy who ran the internal bank, which was kind of the centerpiece of it, is, well, if everyone's an owner and everyone has a voice, how do you manage such a big enterprise? And he said, no. We delegate a lot of the workers delegate tremendous decision-making authority up the chain of command, so to speak. And yes, there is a CEO. But in exchange for that, we commit to invest a tremendous amount of time and energy in communication. And he said, I spend hours and hours a week meeting in small groups, typically, I don't know why, 11 people, sharing information about how we're doing in order that they have the trust in me to delegate the authority to make these important decisions.
Thank you. It's interesting, and I'm hearing that theme in what both of you are saying, that when we are myopically focused on productivity and efficiency, and not on sharing information, not on communication, not on humanizing the workspace, we actually see productivity and efficiency go down. So I'm assuming that ferry wasn't extremely efficient when it was just sitting still on strike, right? It's just a great example of how that focus on those particular patterns and sort of forgetting about or denying the importance of sharing information and communication. It's interesting that we see those kinds of outcomes, and it is the opposite of what the system as it currently is designed wants to produce. And it's something else that that comes up from what you were just saying is this emphasis on information sharing and on communication. And I really want to lean into that and sort of evolve it into what is the role of relationship in this regenerative vision of leadership, economics, culture, society? What does it look like to focus on regeneration in relationships versus systems or individual growth? I'm going to work on this myself in my own space or my own silo. Where does that shift when we start focusing on relationship?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. One thing I want to say real quick before we just jump into that, build off of everything you just said, is the belief that the current industrialized system is efficient and productive. It's actually a myth. It's not true. Right. It's productive and efficient for some people, but in reality, for the majority of all of us, it is not true. We can't have, as an example, an agricultural system where 50% of the food is waste. That is not productive and or efficient in terms of how we are doing things. So I just wanted to, I think there is this belief that the current system actually is serving us well. And even in productivity and efficiency, and it's just not true, on top of all the unintended consequences. But to go to your question, Natalie, which I think it's so important, is that in living systems, it's deeply about relationship. It's about connection. It's about blurring the line and recognizing how everything is related to everything else, and not in this kind of theoretical sense, but in the very practical sense. If we were all really honest with realities that we make in making decisions together in all our different organizations, we would realize that when there is trust, we do all kinds of amazing things in a collective. When there is not, it creates an enormous amount of disconnection and makes it very difficult for us to be able to create that collective beauty that emerges out of that deep relational commitment that comes from trust and connection and honoring one another and the roles and the uniqueness that people bring into these relationships. I can't imagine a living system without an emphasis upon that. And in particular, organizations are just microcosms of that kind of opportunity if we just opened our eyes and committed to supporting those dynamics.
Which is not just a feel good, thing. It's literally how life works. Like that's the whole point of this regenerative paradigm is not some new consultant's idea on how to lead organizations. This is looking to how life self-organizes and manifests potential and evolves that's allowed us to have this conversation today. So it's a very humble approach, which is to stop trying to do things our way and do things the way life works, and see if we generate a better outcome.
Well, and if you look at just a living process that's familiar to everyone, at least on some level, photosynthesis absolutely requires information exchange and relationship in order to function. That is how the regenerative process works. John, you have often said in your course that the community is the curriculum. And Tre, I know you've been focused on and deeply committed to building community in place for years and years. So I'd love to hear both of you speak a little more to this, building on that thought around relationships. How do we cultivate leadership that doesn't ask for or rely on this idea of the solo hero jumping in and saving things, right? But truly building community-based collective capacity for transformation.
Yeah, it's funny when we started the course, I don't know where I got the phrase "the community is the curriculum." I probably stole it from someone, but I didn't believe it as much as I believe it now, having witnessed it. And I think what it's about is that someone said, who studied these things, that everyone shows up in life with their own unique worldview. There's no such thing as a common worldview. And even though Tre and I may share a regenerative worldview, what we actually mean by that is going to be a function of our own experiences, even our own traumas, our own skills. And, this living systems thing is not reducible to equations. So when you get, 3 people together or 30 people together and wrestling with this same idea, they will each bring a different perspective to how to think about it, how to manifest it, how to apply it. And so in the context of a course, John may give a, lecture with 20 slides and say blah, blah, blah. And then 4 people go off into a conversation about it, and it transforms into something entirely different based on the context that those 4 people bring to it. And those 4 people's insights are just as valuable as John's insights. In fact, they're probably more valuable than John's insights. And so what we're seeing is, to quote one of my early science advisors, Sally Gorner, she had this beautiful expression: we are entering a period where we need to learn together. And that is the mystery of this. This is not learning a new equation in physics and then you learn it and now you know it. This shows up differently every single day in every single context. And yet, it's, in my belief, rooted in some very universal patterns and principles. For those of you who've been in my course know, I like to say it's like a snowflake. Every snowflake is unique, but every snowflake looks like a snowflake. And so the power of working in community on this is that insights and epiphanies even emerge out of the collective as opposed to out of the quote expert at the front of the room.
Thank you, John. Trey, do you want to build on that with the focus on community as well?
Yes, yeah. So I was just wanting to say that ultimately at the heart of all this is recognizing that we're not alone. And for us to be in a relationship with one another means we've got to nurture those relationships. And that in a collective learning environment, it transforms all of us in all kinds of ways we could not predict. And I think what we've, unfortunately, in a deeply competitive capitalistic system, it's about you kind of doing it on your own and then highlighting, as you said, the hero in all of that, which would have been the entrepreneur or the CEO or the Elon Musk of what is happening in a given space. And in reality, that all of that is just not true. That the amount of work that's being done by the collective, and if we emphasize the community of work, it would we could have even more potential and incredible innovations that would come out versus the hero or the individual. And so what does it look like for us to continue to support that? And we often talk about, what does it look like to support the capacity that individuals and organizations or the larger collective need to continue to be a resource to their communities and the people around them. It's all very practical. It's all very relevant, meaningful, and I think it comes without unintended consequences that the current industrialized system comes with.
Trey, we talk about leadership is not a position or a title. It's a role. It's an activity. It's a thing you do. And so I think a big part of this approach that you're describing is really about recognizing the leadership capacity across the system, throughout the system, in all kinds of places within the system, rather than this sort of myth that there's, one guy at the top who's leading the system. It doesn't, necessarily work that way. And that brings me to this idea that part of this existing mechanistic paradigm around leadership is that it's somehow a leader's job to maintain order, to know what's coming next and to maintain order in an organization. And I know that our work deeply challenges that concept. So what if it's not? What if a leader's job is not at all to maintain order, but to recognize that we are operating in a state of constant and dynamic change and to work with that dynamic of change? So what does that look like in organizations? What does that look like in economics? To just recognize that this single steady state of order is not happening. What does that look like?
Go ahead, Trey.
Yeah, Natalie, to be honest, I'm just completely inspired by the idea of being surprised. I just want to acknowledge how I was trained not to be surprised. I was trained to predict. I was trained to guarantee outcomes. And actually, in reality, all I did was co-opt what was things that surprised me so that I could build confidence with the board of directors or with investors or with my colleagues that, I planned this from the very beginning. And it was pure bullshit. It was just me saying, hey,
Uh-oh, Trey froze. And on that note, John, you can jump
Oh,
in.
yeah,
Trey,
I'll jump in while
This
we
was thoughtful. I planned it. So yeah, sorry about that. I know I froze.
I think you froze for a
But
second. Yep, that's okay.
yeah, I was just gonna say, in reality, for me, I am embracing that there is something beautiful about things that emerge in a living system that could inform how we can make decisions together. And the more we do that, I think more potential shows up.
Thank you, Trey.
And the only thing I'd add, Natalie and Trey, to that, I mean, obviously we're now in this thing we call the poly crisis, and the lie that we can control things is becoming apparent, I think, to everyone. And just think about the reality of cascading complexity, chaos, and the mindset that delivered us, we need predictable quarterly earnings. There couldn't be two ideas more in conflict with each other. And unfortunately, particularly public companies, they're trapped in this quarterly mindset. And people have been talking about long-term blah 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 forever, but now it's become just absurd. And to think that a large public corporation can go through the level of transformation that we're talking about, that's a multi-decade project, and put up quarterly numbers that keep stock speculators happy on a day-to-day basis, it's just, we need to decide that that's just stupid. And if we're serious about economic system transformation, leaders of corporations are going to need to summon the courage to essentially put that whole story to bed. The problem is that they're stuck in a system where they can get attacked by activist shareholders, and destroyed by activist shareholders, as we've seen. And so part of this regenerative paradigm that we need to keep in mind is that it's not just creating the conditions for health, which it is, but it's also identifying the critical obstacles and then removing those obstacles that are keeping the system trapped in its current state. And, as a finance person, I can't think of an obstacle more important to figure out how to degrade than what I call the finance algorithm, the short-term maximized near-term earnings mindset that boards of directors, CEOs, and chief financial officers are trapped in, and have, in many cases, assumed to be their truth. It's not just like, well, I'm doing it because I have to. They genuinely believe that that is the path to prosperity. I had a friend of mine, a very senior, finance guy, hedge fund guy. I was talking to him about long-termism, and he said, yeah, but the path to the long term is a bunch of short terms. So if you're not managing for those short terms, you'll never get to the long term. There's nothing that could be less true than thinking you're going to get to 10 years, one quarter at a time. So we need to somehow, and I don't know how to do this, we need to break the finance algorithm that's trapping us in this mindset.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to part of the reason why that quote unquote algorithm in the current industrialized design works. There's only one reason why it all works, is because we can externalize what we don't want.
Right.
So there is so much externalizing of things that we don't want it to be a part of our story, because if it is, then we can't predict the outcomes we want. I had a conversation with a top food company in the world, chief sustainability officer, and his exact comment to me is, we choose to externalize it to our supply chain because we can then control our share price. That was his exact comment to me. So if we can externalize it all, then we can predict. It's just not real. And that's why we get the unintended consequences of our current system, is that we don't want to internalize the realities of what we've created. And that is coming to haunt all of us, and as John called the poly crisis, and we're all recognizing as a part of that.
Yeah, and when Occam, I'm blanking on his name, the guy that ran Puma, was the first one to run a ecological P&L. and it showed that they're losing money. They said that at a public shareholder meeting, and no one cared because we don't actually, it was all a shadow P&L, and we don't actually, but if you ran a real P&L on the entire global economy, you would be losing money. No question.
Sure. Well, and you can only operate in a controlled environment as described or hoped for in this way when you're externalizing all of these unwanted. Like that's how the environment is this illusion of a controlled environment. That's how prediction is showing up. Yeah, sure, we predicted that because we controlled the variables because we externalized everything we didn't want to look at.
Right.
It's really that simple.
And even Warren Buffett, God bless him, 60 years, sitting there with his Cokes, 5 a day, one of his biggest holdings, externalizing the obesity and diabetes 2 crisis on humanity. And somehow, even Warren Buffett can't connect those dots, which I just don't understand.
So we're getting a little bit close to the end of our time together. Let's shift a little bit. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat too, to talk more specifically about the regenerative leadership program. Trey, why was this program created, and how can it help support this kind of shift away from some of these absurdities that we're describing into a meaningful approach to regenerative leadership moving forward?
Yeah, I think at its heart is partnering with individuals who recognize they want to bring these insights into their communities. And what can we do to help support you? And giving you community where you may feel alone in the context of you doing this work, where there is a global community of 2,000 plus people who are saying, hey, we really want to do this together. How do we connect with others who are wanting to do that? How do we support in creating real, incredible tools and practices that support deeply rooted in principles and patterns that help you make those decisions in the context that where you are? And we recognize that, you know, in any type of real leadership that's brought, there's three kind of what we call 3 levels of work, which some of you may be familiar with in terms of terminology, which is the individual, the collective, and the larger system. And we really support that all 3 of those things need to be really focused on all at the same time. We recognize the system needs to change. We recognize we're going to do it with people together. And so what does that look like for us to make decisions and inspire one another in that work? And we all have individual work to do. And how do we continue that commitment and continue that process? We need 1 million people committed to this kind of process. And we all have a long ways to go to be able to create that kind of capacity within our global economies and communities. And we're committed to supporting the development of that.
Thank you, Trey. John,
Yeah, if I can
go ahead.
just pile on for a second on the you know, let's call it the inner work. I do want to bring consciousness into this conversation. You know, if I were to sort of reduce regenerative leadership to the essence, it's an individual who has a higher level of consciousness than the people around them. And as a result, they become a natural attractor, and people begin to follow. And I found it interesting to observe the news about the new pope. And this is not a religious comment. This applies to leadership. When people asked, you know, people that know him to describe him, they talked about qualities of his humanity. You know, he's a good listener. He's thoughtful. He doesn't speak when it's not necessary. There's something about that man who people who know him just naturally gravitated to appoint the leader of the entire Catholic Church. And I think we see that quality in, you know, if we think about who's a real leader that we admire, whether it's, you know, Mahatma Gandhi or Desmond Tutu or Martin Luther King, that there's something about them as human beings that they operate at a higher level of consciousness than, frankly, most quote unquote business leaders who are driven by competitive drive and fear and conquering and ego. And that's transparent to people. And so people who work for people like that play the game because everyone's always in it for themselves. But that's not real leadership. And I think this moment in the human project is demanding that we rise to the occasion in terms of this higher level of consciousness. And so I've found that to be, really basically fundamental. And so, ideas that we've known for a long time, servant leader as opposed to hero leader, that's the regenerative economy. This doesn't have to be super complicated.
And just to continue to add to that, that there are cultures who have embraced this kind of leadership.
Right.
Indigenous cultures. This is not new. Both spiritual traditions, indigenous traditions that have said, hey, listen, the collective is how we are going to serve one another. And it's not going to be about somebody who's going to lead from power and control. And I think our ability to continue to embrace leadership from that perspective, I think, will release all kinds of unique solutions to things that we're experiencing today that are not really on the table and not even a thoughtful consideration.
And we have to acknowledge that what we're talking about is exactly the opposite of what we see happening in the real world, particularly in this country, particularly at the inauguration. Absolute lack of courage among leaders to lead. So we're sort of being shown what happens if we don't do this, maybe as a way to inspire us to move in this direction. Sort of the shadow is in our face.
Well said, John. And that really just, brings us back to that sort of really simple frame that you created a few minutes ago, Trey, of just there's what work can I do to be a regenerative leader? What work can I do with others to grow regenerative leadership? And what does it look like for enough of us to work in this way to start to have larger impacts on the system, right? So this idea of the I, the we, and then the larger system around us. And that brings me to my last question for this time together, which is just thinking about your own journeys into being the regenerative leaders that you are. If somebody on this call is feeling called to lead differently, if they're thinking, how do I do more of this? How do I bring more of this into my life, whether it's at the I, the we, or the larger system level? But maybe they don't know exactly where to start with this. What would you tell them? What would you share from your experience and from what opportunities are right here to sort of guide someone along that journey?
I guess, obviously we believe that this work needs to be done in community, and we don't believe this is a expert consultant train you how to do this kind of a story. So the reason we've created this combined community is to create that, that container for this to happen. And again, I think people who have been through our courses will acknowledge or will certify that they have found through synchronicity in a little Zoom room something between a comment that some stranger they've never seen or met before and may never see again makes that changes things, or they found a new business partner and they've gone off and launched a new business together. And so we believe in the magic of that synchronicity happening, and that's why we're committed to doing this. But the other thing I would say is that this is it's a lonely journey. You go outside of our little bubble and you get confronted right in the face with the cruel, competitive, extractive reality of how business and our economy works. And now, that cruelness has been descended upon public servants in this country, and the way they've been just treated is just nothing other than cruel and unnecessary and trauma creating for no reason, because some knucklehead tech bro thinks that they know how to manage something. And so it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But our vision is that this small little, what Nobel laureate Ilya Prigozhin referred to as small islands of coherence, when the system is far from equilibrium, can shift the entire system. And my life work, my theory of change is we need to build these islands of coherence. Otto Scharmer has built an island of coherence. We need to have these islands of coherence connect, and a very small number of people can shift the reality of how the system works. But it's not going to happen by John going into the Treasury Department and giving a speech about regenerative finance. It's going to happen much more collectively from the bottom up, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to stress that this is about creating different conditions and experiences for all of us, and that deep connection is what we should be craving and seeking. Is where that looks at. That may be local, that may be within our community, that may be global. It could be a part of a community that you're connecting with regularly. But to do that, I think is the beginning of this process. And John said, well, why all of that is important. I do think that when we start shifting conditions, then what emerges out of that are the things that are from those conditions. Our experience right now and what it is across in the US and across the world is because we've created those conditions. It's not a surprise. Those have come out of all kinds of designs that we've put in place that now we're having to deal with. So let's reimagine what those conditions could be if we start nurturing, supporting, connecting, and believing. I think we deeply need to believe that there is something better for all of us, and that it can be meaningful and it can be transformational.
Thank you, Trey. Well, that was a powerful close. Thank you. So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to share some of the ways that you can get involved specifically with our community. So we are forming and have formed the With Life Collective. That is our shared community coming together through Capital Institute and In Rhythm. And as part of membership in the collective, which is an annual membership, or you can do it monthly, we offer members only gatherings, which are local, in place, in community. Right now, our next one is coming up in Seattle in June. Right now, we are doing these in-person gatherings in Dallas, Denver, Seattle, Europe, and Africa. And that's an amazing opportunity to connect in person, in community, and to talk more about these concepts, some of the challenges, and really to nurture relationship and emergence in these spaces.
We also have monthly online gatherings too.
Oh, that's right. I'm hosting those. Thank you, Tay. We also have, as part of the collective, you'll also get a With Life Learning Pass, which just gives you all access to all of the Capital Institute, In Rhythm and With Life courses, workshops, and programs. So, like I said at the start, we offer courses and programs in design, leadership, economics, finance, money and banking, investment. And so part of the collective membership just gives you access to all of those courses and all of that programming. In addition, as we have talked about much today, really this is about connecting with a global network and a community. Right now, we have over 2,000 people in our community representing 81 different countries around the world, which is honestly not that far off from this particular call. As I was watching all of you chime in with where you are calling from, this is a globally representative call, and so is our community. And so This is our call to you that if this is resonant with you and you want to join us and talk more about us and learn directly from the work that Trey and John have been doing in the world for all these years, this is an opportunity to join the collective. We are starting our next leadership program on June 4th, which is 6 weeks of leadership content around everything we just talked about. So, what is it like to activate human energy as potential in an organization? What is it like to improve communication and information flows? What is it like to manage the ever present dynamics of change as a regenerative leader? And we are giving away 5 full scholarships, 5 seats to that regenerative leadership program. And so at the end of this call, you will receive an email and more details of everything that we just shared with you. But to enter, you are eligible to enter for joining this chat. You can visit inrhythm.co/leadership program giveaway and submit an entry. We will be choosing our winners tomorrow at midnight Eastern. So
Free stuff.
we invite you and welcome you to join our giveaway and see if you can't get one of those 5 seats. Thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you, John and Trey, for such a compelling and insightful conversation. I always feel inspired when I hear from you, and I hope everyone on this call feels inspired too. We have great work to do together. So we invite you to join us and let's do it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Natalie.
Natalie.
Thank you,
Thanks
John.
everyone for joining. I love watching all the chat comments. Lots of wisdom there.
Indeed. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.